All right, we're back again for the third coffee talk of day 2. And this one is Nigel Upton talking to us about smart cities and the future of IoT and what it's going to do for the citizens and the governments.
Can you guys hear me okay now? Oh, well, wonderful. Thank you. I'm just admiring the shiny Dell laptop sitting over there. Come on, who's got no class? So my name is Nigel Upton, and I look after our universal IoT platform, and we essentially do the data enablement. What does that mean? Typically, we work with a whole bunch of different suppliers who are producing devices, things, and in the case of smart cities, the citizens actually get to choose what type of services they want, in the theory that the elected official would like to remain elected. So it varies dramatically country by country, region by region, city by city. Places like India, women's security is a big, big social issue. So that was the first solution that we built, going out across 400 million people in India with different devices. They look a little bit like these sort of things. And it's got in there a GPS and a LoRa connectivity. Could have a SIM card, could have whatever you wanted. And these sort of devices, they have a panic button on it. And if somebody feels threatened, then they press a panic button. And that then, depending on where they are, they have a guaranteed response within a certain number of minutes from a security company. It also starts to get a little more sophisticated if you also have video surveillance. The video cameras automatically turn on in the surrounding area, and you're starting to see just a greater and greater level of sophistication of the type of services that are being rolled out in smart cities. So, the obvious ones of street lights and being able to control street lights. Street lights are interesting because it normally is about 35% of the total energy budget for a city. They spend a lot of money on lighting. And if you can control that and reduce the amount of, reduce the energy consumption, then that's a good thing to do. So that's what our platform helps them do. At the same time, you can make lighting much more intelligent, proximity-based, so that it'll go on and off as and when you need it, rather than just remain on all night. There's various things you can do with streetlights that are quite interesting. And if you look at the demo site that we have, as you walk in, you'll see a street light, and on top of it, there's a bunch of sensors. That includes a video camera. It includes a sound detector for things like gunshots. There's just a bunch of sensors that they're using street lamps more and more to be able to sensorize a city. So the development that you're seeing on just the different types of sensors, and there's so many innovative brand new companies coming out with new things. Our job is to be able to connect these new things over any type of network, whether it's LoRa, whether it's Sigfox, whether it's cellular, Wi-Fi, and then be able to take the data, build city command centers, or if you're from the telco world, a NOC, a network operations center, but build them for cities, so that you integrate in video surveillance together with smart trash, smart lighting, all the other services that are being rolled out. So interesting times.
So we often associate Internet of Things as being we're collecting a bunch of data, and sometime later we're going to do something useful with it. So I'm really intrigued with the panic alarm as sort of sitting in that the more immediate connection to the citizen. Are there other initiatives you've seen of that very immediate connection?
The panic button is the most obvious, and I think from your previous speaker on the industrial IoT side of it, that is much more immediate. It's if something goes wrong, somebody's going to get killed. So there's a sense of urgency. Whereas we tend to deal with more widespread devices that you can deal with latency of a minute or two, and that's okay. It's not going to affect human lives. So whether a trash can is picked up in the next hour or the next 5 hours, nobody's going to die. Well, at least not in my neighborhood. So it depends on the use case. It's also interesting just watching how the connectivity evolves. if, for example, you're a phone company, then you might believe that a cellular connection is the best connection. If you're not a phone company, then you don't believe that. Funny that thing of if you have a hammer, everything, well, you know what I mean. We see a lot of aggression in the low-power wide area network deployments, LoRa particularly.
LoRa and Sigfox for those,
Yeah.
and that's the panic alarm would be coin cell operated and would have a single coin cell with a 2 to 5 year life on it,
Exactly.
rather than having to be recharged every day
Exactly.
as you would if it had a cellular.
Yeah, and the sensors now are getting embedded in products. As IoT becomes a bit more mature, think about things like bicycles or backpacks. The sensors are now being embedded in there, and they have typically a GPS device and either a LoRa type connectivity or what will soon be narrowband IoT, so that the days of having your bicycle stolen will be behind us, and the days of not knowing where your backpack is or tracking your beloved one as they wander through the woods across the Pacific Coast Highway, you'll be able to track them. Now, whether you should or not is perhaps an ethical question, but anyway.
Like that bit just around what you should and shouldn't do and whatever, that's one of the areas I'm interested in, and
Yeah.
I got sort of a few different things and bouncing around my head about it, but it's really on the data, who has access to it, how do you expose that, and then how do you, and in some cases where it's relevant, anonymizing that data. So I guess starting off, like, if it's, say, security company data, it's a panic button type thing, whatever, then that data that's that company that's doing that.
Right.
And it's their data and they can do whatever they please with it.
Yeah.
But if I'm a city doing it, say I have transport data sets or something like that, or the trash can pickup, that sort of stuff. If it's my local council, government, whatever, is the one who's actually doing the data collection of their network, what are you seeing in terms of the way they're approaching exposing that data, making that data available to other people? Like, do you see differences in approaches where some councils say, that's our data, we hold on to it, it's tough, or other ones are like, here's these random data sets and we'll make them available to whoever wants to try and figure out cool uses of it?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. There's a lot of legal issues with it as well. In the case of trash cans, that's relatively straightforward. There's not too many parties involved, and if you wanted to anomalize the trash can route data, that type of stuff, I could see that being maybe of value to other trash companies or other cities. And there's a lot of sharing of best practices city to city, so you could see the anomalized data being used there. Where it starts to get a little more tricky is on things like connected cars. And who owns the data on the car, and is it the car company, is it the component provider, is it the service shop, or is it the consumer? There are pretty strict rules on where data is allowed to sit in terms of country barriers, and so data sovereignty is quite well defined, but data ownership is not well defined at all.
And it's one of those things as well where maybe you think you anonymize the data that you expose, but then, like, I think the case was, I think it was Uber that published some data a few years back on New York City, and people could pretty quickly figure out which celebrities were, what their traffic things were based on. Well, they knew that their start and end point. They go, okay, well, I know that X celebrity lives at this location. There's these Uber rides going to and from there.
Right.
That's probably that person.
Right.
And or it's that thing where, and even if there's enough data, I can glean patterns from it. So like the traffic patterns, it might be really interesting from a city trying to figure out, how do I manage my traffic congestion? How do I do things like, what can I find out about, when does Alistair drive past such and such location? Where is he? Maybe he's not actually going to work like he says he does when he's going to work.
I hear you.
I work at the bottom of my garden, so that's not so much of a problem. But that fundamentally is about how the data was anonymized. It was anonymized lazily by Uber, that they anonymized the user rather than the trip. And that's the classic problem of anonymizing data for publication. But it's not an intractable problem. It's simply establish a best practice and publish and communicate how to do that.
It's one of those things as well. You're trying to anonymize the data to protect people, but you're also like, how do I anonymize it but keep it useful?
Right.
You know, like I can with trip data, I can take out the user identifying information, but I actually really need to know where their start and end points and their routes were, because that's actually that's the interesting stuff. But it's also, yeah, how do I balance it out? It's like in network packet captures or something like that, we might want to anonymize our IP addresses, but I have to be consistent in my anonymization so I can actually see what are the flows. I guess what might be interesting as well is what you're seeing with the way different countries are thinking about that as well. Just in terms of, are some biasing to an open approach, others biasing towards closed. Just interesting to see what you're seeing on a regional basis, or is it just really depends who's running the show in that particular town?
Well, remember that the phone companies know exactly what you're doing, where you are. Even they can turn their phone on if they want. They can turn on the microphone. They can turn on the camera. In fact, some 3 acronymed government agencies do exactly that. So I haven't seen, at least on the phone companies, the issue with anonymization of data, even though it's quite widely used. So telcos know how to do this, and we've been working with them for the last 30 years. It's the newer stuff where the German view on privacy is quite different to the American view. And it's also a generational thing. My kids' expectation of privacy is very different to mine. They post stuff on there and you're looking at it going, wow. So we've seen, particularly in Asia and in parts of Western Europe, very heavy emphasis on data. Brazil, for example, very strict laws on sovereignty of exactly where that data is allowed to reside. The same in a lot of the EU countries. But those laws are in place and they're already enforced. It's the anonymization that's going to become a lot more tricky to do properly, as you pointed out with Uber. We already see this in agriculture, and there's a big fight on who owns the data for precision ag. And is it the producer of the actual... Well,
if I own a John Deere tractor, I'm not even allowed to attempt to repair that tractor. John Deere just licenses that tractor to me.
Yeah. But that's what's happening. Yeah. So I don't know what the answer is, quite frankly, but it will change. And the connected cars, I suspect, will be producing so much data about how you drive, and there's stuff already being fed into insurance companies where right now you kind of have the option of plugging in an ODB2 port connector, and then you can analyze your driving.
I mean, I'm sure we've all been in a hire car and we're all wondering, if I exceed the speed limit, does the hire car company know that I'm doing that? It's like, yeah, probably they do.
Yeah.
I was just going with the flow of traffic, by the way.
You must have a sense of humor. Yeah, I've seen your rugby team play. Sorry, I'm kidding. At least there's nobody from South Africa here. Oh my gosh.
I don't think so. I think we're all right on that front.
Oh, good. Okay.
Maybe we should swing this back to smart cities somewhere along this conversation. Are you seeing the sort of instrumentation of their infrastructure leading to different ways that the local governments are actually setting policies, setting social policies from how they're instrumenting their population and their constituencies?
So technology is being used in at least 2 ways, one of which is getting the opinion of citizens. So you see a lot of the Twitter fire hose feeds, you're seeing the social media sentiment analysis stuff, and that's quite useful for deciding what type of services that the city wants to launch. On the other hand, we build these big command centers for them, where as they digitize more and more stuff, from trash to lighting to panic buttons, video surveillance is huge now. And the more and more incidents we have all over the world, the more and more people want to be able to get a grip on video surveillance. So that's accelerating quickly. It seems to be, normally the first is around citizen safety and security. And that tends to be the top button that keeps a politician in power, but also the video surveillance stuff. It's interesting now, because you can tell when a vehicle leaves a lane, you can tell when abnormal behavior happens, and when you start combining a vehicle leaving a lane and a gunshot going off, you can instrument all of that and know exactly what's going on through a command center.
I was thinking of the more longer term than the immediate reactive.
Right.
Right. Just thinking through whether there's things about traffic patterns or whether there's city planning changes around and that instrumentation. I guess the focus is more the new and shiny is the much shorter term, much quicker turnaround on data than we've previously seen.
It is to some extent, but traffic patterns particularly, because cities are designed for transport. And the new mega cities getting built are quite different to the older cities, where, paved over cow paths. So the traffic analysis, particularly through video analysis, is getting more and more interesting. They're also sensorizing roads so that you can tell exactly what the traffic is doing at any given time. The traffic piece is probably the highest value to most of these cities. But they're also implementing, smart parking is relatively straightforward to put in, because there's statistics in some of these cities of 30% of their traffic are people driving around looking for parking. So if you can get rid of all of that and pre-book parking and automate all the payment of it and link it to cameras that'll take your license plate, and then you just charge for exactly how long you're there, get rid of that concept of having to pay a meter and pay a meter. So all that stuff is happening very quickly. They also, any city wants to be able to drive some financial return as well. So that's why this smart lighting is quite popular, because you reduce costs. Smart parking is popular because you can drive revenue from it and arguably make it more attractive for people to come into the city. The same with traffic. And then the safety angle see a lot of traction on that.
So what are the HP products that are actually involved in this? Because so far it's been a very generic discussion about what smart cities are and could be, but what are the specifics of what HP is doing in smart city?
So we build a application enablement platform called the Universal IoT platform. And this Universal IoT platform allows us to be able to connect to any device over any network. So we don't build the device, and we use whatever is the appropriate network, whether it's LoRa or cellular or Wi-Fi, whatever it happens to be. We suck the data off the devices. We put it into a common model. We use a standards-based model called the 1M2M model. By the way, the idea of having a standards-based platform is quite important also for security, because the 1M2M defines how the data is encrypted, how the transportation between the device and the platform is done, just exactly how that is encrypted and controlled, and public and private license keys and all the rest of it. So we take the data, we do the analytics on it, we do the mashups of data with other data sources, and then build microservices like smart parking, smart lighting, all of that type of stuff. We build the application layer, and we control the device through, if any of you are familiar with Jasper from Cisco. So Jasper is all built on HPE technology. So we do all of that connectivity management to control the devices, pull them in and out of service, basically do the digital twinning of the complete network and then control the network. So we essentially take it from once the device starts spewing out data, it comes onto our platform, we take it from there all the way up to the applications.
So I'm curious with the Universal IoT platform. So I'm familiar with, say, mobile device management or endpoint management solutions, but I'm curious how you manage IoT, I guess, traffic and management across all of these different types of connectivity, especially the new ones like Sigfox, LoRa-based connectivity. How does that work, that you get that data and work on that actual management?
Sure. So usually it's going through some form of gateway. And if you're using LoRa, then it's normally a Semtech chip in there in the gateway. And we have that gateway talking to our platform. And so we connect over whatever mechanism it happens to be, whether it's LoRa or satellite, or quite frankly, we couldn't care less. We've repurposed a whole bunch of our telco assets to do the connectivity management. So we've built out networks for these for the last 20, 25 years. So we know how to provision a device and how to control it and how to clean it and wipe it and all the rest of it. So the through over-the-air updates, we do the SIM management pieces of it, the provisioning of SIMs, the dynamic changing of SIMs. So we're very, very familiar and comfortable with that space. And that background gives us the ability to be able to really understand all sorts of different types of networks, not just cellular or not just LoRa.
And also, I was wondering from a practical perspective, with all these different types of connectivities and all the different types of use cases that exist for smarter cities, how do you kind of think about how to align these connectivities to use cases? For instance, are there certain types of newer connectivities that are better for, say, these alert type systems, or better for, say, trash can or utilities management in comparison? What tends to be used most for what for the top smart cities use cases?
So for something like a trash can, essentially what the city told us is we need to be able to have a device that'll go in the trash can and last for the life of the trash can. Turns out that a trash can life is about 5 or 6 years. So they wanted something that will measure the depth of the trash inside that trash can, and they wanted it to last 5 or 6 years. So in that case, LoRa was a good technology because it's very low power. It only is taking data once a day or twice a day or once a limit is reached, so it's not very chatty. Embedding sensors in stuff where you're never going to dig them up again. Battery life is key, and you will choose some type of low power wide area network for that, whether it's LoRa or soon to be narrowband IoT, but you want something that's very, very power sensitive. It's different to, the other thing is the length of the waves and how deep you want that to reach. If you're buried in the basement deep in, say, Tokyo, you need to be able to have a network that's going to get through X number of concrete walls and be able to penetrate. So that'll also help select the type of network technology that you use. Turns out LoRa is quite good at that because it's quite a long wave. In other cases where the devices are a lot more chatty, it could be video surveillance. And so you're going to have some quite big data files coming through. And in that case, you're either going to have it wired over Wi-Fi, or you're going to stick a SIM card in there and negotiate with the operator a decent rate and decide what you're going to upload and what you're going to download. But that device is dramatically different to a low energy, beacon type device. So it really does depend on the type of device it's almost as though it's a natural selection of the appropriate network for that type of device. From very low energy, not very chatty, small bits of data, through to video feed, which is intense. And so you will have to choose the right network for that type of stuff. Yeah, we get asked a lot of retrofitting questions as well when you come and retrofit things like electricity meters, gas meters. We spend a lot of time on this in Japan because of the structural challenges of having to go quite deep underground. Plus, because of the way it's designed with earthquakes and things, there's some fairly solid foundations in there. So, you really do have to have penetrative waves to be able to do the reading that you want to read.
So when we think about all the smart infrastructure that's going to be there for the purpose of city services and things of that nature, there is the potential we talked about earlier, IoT devices in backpacks and bicycles and things like that. I think of, as a parent, having the ability to securely subscribe to a mesh infrastructure that can capture the geographic data of my kid's backpack. I can make the hopefully decent assumption that where my kid's backpack is, my kid is. Not a fair assumption for many families, but we could even see the point of some of these integrated devices in clothing, in reusable things like shoes, belts, that are more likely to be more or less permanently attached to the kid. But the thing that I'm concerned about is, while all this metadata about where that device physically is in the geography, that it comes at the price of privacy, and or in order to subscribe, I have to be inundated by adware. So is it going to be something that citizens of the community would be able to use part of their tax goes to cover that so you don't have to be ad supported, and that we would have sufficient encryption in place that my kids' data only gets seen by me and the people that I want to allow to have access.
On the privacy side first, and being able to put around geofences of things that, yeah, my kids objected to open surgery where I wanted to insert it. They said no for some reason. But I mean, it's a real issue for parents. I think parents are prepared to make different sacrifices than kids. And once a kid hits 18, then are you still allowed to track them? I mean, there's a lot of ethical questions in this, and but if they're under 18, then goddammit, they're going to do what I want, and I'm going to track them. Or if they want to drive my car, these are the conditions under which I'm going to put a geofence around where you can drive, and how much power I'm going to make available to you in the car. All that's configurable now. But on the privacy thing, I don't think it's been worked out, quite frankly. I mean, as I said right at the start, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. If it's the safety of your kids, then for me, I would do it. But it comes down to individual choices and different cultures as to what's going to be acceptable. So, I mean, data is encrypted, and there's so much data about you out there anyway. As I said, the phone companies have got your data, and they do a reasonable job of protecting it. I have no doubt there are going to be some exposures of data, and it's going to take a few crises for things to actually get done properly. We adhere to this idea of the 1M2M standard, which means that the data is the security of the data is forced by the standard to be encrypted, and public and private keys, that type of stuff. So some cities are attracted to that. Other ones, whether it's naivety or whatever it happens to be, a bit like the UK Public Health Service with all these XP, wondering why they get hacked with ransomware. When you've got, you can't cure stupidity when it comes to security. You can only have case after case, and then people are forced to do something. I suspect there'll be a lot of mileage out of security on this, because I don't think people have figured out the full extent as just to how much information is going to be exposed. As I said, we use the 1M2M model to be able to answer that question, but there's hundreds of IoT platforms out there, so I suspect bad things are going to happen, and then it'll get, fixed. Sorry, and the second question was on?
It was, once that data is secure, there's some way for us as the citizens that we're theoretically paying for this infrastructure through taxing, that we would be able to take advantage of that for personal use, i.e. tracking where our kids are. That I'm thinking of grade school age, that right. I think in most cultures you would probably figure, okay, in today's societies, yes, I want to know where my kids are. I may not watch what they're doing every day, every hour of the day, but if you're late from school, part of the geofencing piece, I expect you home by X o'clock. Right. You're not, where are you? Yeah. You're not going to have the ability. I mean, today we have the cooperative mesh networks like Tile. Right. So I throw a tile in my kid's backpack, and assuming that there are other tile users that have decided to share their bandwidth and integrate with the tile network, I might have an idea of having, a 20-meter radius of where they are. If we're going to have smart cities that have this capability as part of its native functionality, because of everything else that we're doing that way, being able to take advantage of that in a secure way, not just from the data integrity, the data security side, but also I should be the only one that gets to see where my kid is, those aspects.
Agree. So it's not a technical issue. I mean, it's an implementation issue, and that's why it's got to be taken seriously. But I suspect hacks will happen, and then it'll get taken seriously. It was interesting when we worked with operators as to, if you want to track your kid and you want to be able to geofence and put in boundaries as to where they can be, there's some simple stuff like checking in and out of the bus, and it's easy to put wireless readers in there, cheap, LoRa-based networks on the bus, so that when your child got on the bus and when they got off the bus. We found the price point to be about $2 a month is about what people would be fine paying for having a device that I know where my kid is. I'm not going to pay $30 a month, but $2 a month to track your dog or your child or whatever it is that you want to track. That seems to be a reasonable price point, and that's without adware. So that is just you having your portal, being able to understand your data and see where things are. But that price point, it's tough for some of the operators to get down to that level, because for this, the network cost for this, we built them for AT&T, Verizon. It cost about $16 a month for that operator to run a network and provision this. Voice, data, 911, and there's big expensive billing systems from companies like Amdocs. This is not cheap. So for you to get down to $1 a month, and if they charge you $2, we're building these networks for them, these brand new IoT only networks. They strip out all the stuff like voice and 911, or get rid of all the billing stuff. You can make it cheap. So we can get it down to about a cost of about $1 a month, and then the customer would pay $2. I think that's a reasonable price point, but I mean, it'd be interesting what you guys think. I mean, what would you feel willing to pay for putting a tracker on your dog?
If I thought my dog, which I don't have at the time, was as important enough for it, then I'd spend more than $2 a month. Yeah. Especially if I had one of those dogs that was a fence jumper, and I was always concerned about it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
My grade school kids, I'm not going to be as worried about as I will when they get high school and driver's licenses, and that their circle of where they're going to roam increases manifold, and then it becomes more important to do that, and there's more value in that. You hate to put any cost around a life, but there is
right.
You have income and you have expenses, and you have to be able to balance the two one way or the other.
Yeah.
But the idea that you're stripping out all of the unnecessary functions for that end device should theoretically lower the costs involved in provisioning and maintaining. And again, if the mesh, the network that's required for the community devices to report in is already in place, then theoretically you shouldn't have to necessarily bear the cost of that infrastructure if the burden is already in place for the mailboxes, the garbage cans, the electric meters, all of that. Then it becomes a convenience piece that people, I hate to say that it's people of means can choose to do that. I also grew up in the 70s and early 80s where my parents didn't see me for days at a time, it seemed, and apparently having no tracker was just fine, and I made it this long.
I tell you, when your kids, talk to you and say, "You mean you didn't have Facebook when you grew up?" And you're going, "We had a stick."
But let me introduce you to Kick the Can.
Exactly.
That's a true example of survivor bias, though, right? I made it, I'm just fine. Well...
Yeah, but it's true, though. I mean, anyway, our little protected children these days. Oh my gosh, could you imagine back at your high school or university having corners you'd have to go to if somebody said something offensive? Oh my gosh. Anyway, different world. Yeah, it's finding the price point that will drive the adoption, and we always tease our colleagues in India for Indian price points of how the Indians invented the number 0, because that was the price they'd like to pay. And there's, the price points in India are so different to Western Europe or the US. And the US still has the most expensive networks in the world. I mean, US customers for cellular pay more than anywhere else by quite a big factor. I know it'll be interesting to see how this network continues to evolve with the help of Google as well, rolling out new services like Google Fi.